All right, I want to welcome you all to our session on the federal data evolution. I'm Nick Wakeman. I'm the editor of Washington Technology. And we're going to talk about the new federal data strategy and what it means to agencies and vendors who serve them. I have just a couple sort of housekeeping things. The session is being recorded, so when we do, we're going to have a Q&A towards the end. So when we get to the Q&A, wait for us to someone will bring you a microphone so that we capture everything, and then I guess sometime in the next couple of weeks the video will be available. And one of our panelists, unfortunately, Teresa Smith, who's the Chief Data Officer for the Defense Logistics Agency, is not with us. She got called into the Pentagon, so I guess that took a little more precedent than coming here today. So we'll miss her, though, of course. So the federal data strategy is advancing. It's moving forward, and with it, the government is trying to get to a more consistent approach to how they manage data, data stewardship, use, access. It's a great idea, but what exactly does that mean to industry and to government? So that's what we're here to talk about. We have a great panel of experts from industry and government, and so down at the end, I do very short introductions, but we have Jean Edwards, who's the Executive Director of Federal Strategic Programs at Dell EMC. She gave a great presentation this morning, so we expect you to end the day really strong. And next to Jean, we have Gary Hicks, who is the Director of Engineering for Hitachi Vantara. Gosh, I should know how to say it. Vantara Federal, sorry. And next to me is Oki Mek, who's the Senior Advisor for the Department of Health and Human Services. Each brings a kind of a unique perspective to data and data management and of course, for the federal data strategy. But first, I want to ask you all a question. By a show of hands, who understands the federal data strategy and what it means to your customers or to your company? Not a single hand, so this is great. So I guess, okay, I'll just start with you. Since you're in government, when you see that kind of reaction, what does it make you, or lack of reaction, what do you think?
No, I think this type of initiatives in terms of conferences in engaging the industry and explain the pain points of the federal government is a good thing. And I thank you all for coming up here. I think data strategy, if you want to do cloud, you want to do cybersecurity, you want to better improve business processes, you want to sunset old technology, it starts with data. Think about it. All those technologies support data. And what is the biggest pain point in the government is paper. If you could solve getting away from paper, try to digitize it, try to normalize it, and analyze it, and there's going to be a big need to share the data across federal government and also private public as well. If you are an industry, you have to think about data strategy, which is the biggest part. The fundamental of data strategy is getting away from paper. If you could understand that, I think you could align and trying to solve an issue within the federal government. It's paper. Wow. Simple.
So what are you all doing to develop your strategy? What are kind of the elements of your strategy? How are you getting rid of paper, I guess?
Getting rid of paper. Record management is coming up with a soft mandate for everybody to use to go digital. Think about it. Just trying to print something, handwritten, sign it, upload it, scan it, upload it, and send it. It takes 30 minutes to an hour. If you could just digitize and sign it within a matter of seconds, you could be done. Our strategy, at least from the OCIO perspective in HSS is so large. It's about 1.13 trillion a year in annual operation dollar. It's so large. We have a strategy around service delivery in terms of how do we support FATARA, PMA, MGT, as well as some of the other legislations around the government. Also having governance around, everything's so waterfall traditionally. Now you're going to think about Agile, DevOps. How do we support that methodology? How do we support people going buying COTS product, Salesforce, ServiceNow? Instead of building in-house, you're actually just purchasing a software as a service. So that's one of the initiatives. The second initiative is cybersecurity, improving cybersecurity. I think I'm a little biased around cybersecurity because my background is cybersecurity. Think about it. The first thing you do, if you get stranded on an island, what do you think about? You think about security, right? You have to secure your environment, secure yourself before you could do anything else fun. It's cybersecurity. Third is cloud strategy, and then fourth is modernization, having the OCIO and HSS an office where we modernize, where we could test modernization, where we could prove a concept in a small scale and a small proof of concept and scale out. Those are the 4 initiatives within HSS, but it all revolves around data. So I love talking about data. I think it's so simple to solve, but it's just getting around the culture because people are used to paper.
Yeah. Now, for Gene and Gary, how does that, from what Oki was just talking about, how does that kind of fit with what you're hearing from your customers? Is that a similar story, or is HHS in a different place, or what are you all seeing?
I think I'm sorry, Gene. I think HHS is different because they have such a mountain of data, and they have probably more consumers than a lot of agencies that we deal with day in, day out. But what you've seen Hitachi do over the last couple of years is move from just an infrastructure provider into a data services provider and help our customers really identify their data challenges. Because when we go in to talk to customers, a lot of times they don't even know where all their data resides. They don't have access to it. They think some of it's hidden over here, and there's no enterprise level data governance or intelligence around that data as they're trying to service their agency's missions.
So, no, I think HHS is spot on. I was just telling Oki before we started that CMS just put an RFI on the streets to address the Center for Program Integrity. It's all around fraud and waste and abuse for pay it right. They need a system where they can collaborate across multiple siloed data sets and be able to not necessarily put it into a central repository, but access it and use it appropriately. You can't leverage data if the data isn't in the right environment to be leveraged. So you need, tools that eventually not only gather the data, but give you the ability to do the artificial intelligence downstream. So I think what Oki just said is spot on. I've already seen them publish the RFIs, and I think it's just started.
Yeah. So with HHS, how does it, because HHS, like DOD and DHS and these other really large agencies, I mean, you've got FDA, you've got CMS, you've got CDC. How does, when you got those different fiefdoms, how does that work in trying to create a strategy?
So you start, you might have 100 ideas trying to solve an issue. You have to do a very good strategic analysis before you might have 100 ideas, but you should only pursue one idea. Is that, you got to have a pretty good, strong business plan. You got to have a good, is it sustainable? You got to do sustainability analysis. Is it feasible? Is it marketable, which is the most important part? Can you market your idea? You don't think about the government as marketing, but HSS is so large. In order to get people to buy in, you have to market. You have to market. If you want to market to the leadership, you have to think about PMA, President Management Agenda, MGT, FISMA, FATARA. If you market to the mid-tier leadership, you think about budget costs, cutting costs, efficiency. But when you talk about the workforce, they could care less about what technology you use. It's all about efficiency. How are you going to make my life better? We use blockchain, but I could bring a chair to the meeting and say, I'm going to make your life better. And they could care less what technology we use. It's about efficiency, about supporting the mission. So humans in design, I spoke with on the last panel, humans in design is the key to getting people buy-in, getting people to lean in and engage the initiative, to support it, to collaborate, to exchange ideas, to get people excited. I always said, there's no adoption. I think Jeff Bezos did. Jeff Bezos mentioned this. I think I stole it from him. But there's no adoption. There's no innovation without adoption. You got to have people buying in to what you're doing. And really, what we did with Accelerate is really to say, hey, you're building the system. You're going to be using the system. You're going to build it. We're going to facilitate the build by doing human-centered design, by going to them and get some pain point, bring it back, brainstorm, prototype, and bring it back again every 2-3 weeks. Cycle it out and refine it until the solution clearly meet the requirements. And I think human-centered design is a key to innovation.
Now, are you looking to pull, like, let's say something, a great pilot or project at CDC, you're going to pull that into FDA, have them do a similar approach? Is that part of your strategy?
So we were very successful with Accelerate. We use blockchain to facilitate the acquisition process. And the reason we use blockchain because there's a need to share data, not just within HSS. I think the vision is to share data across other acquisition system as well. But I think Accelerate is the model in terms of, is the future of how you innovate and how you run IT, using blockchain, using machine learning to take data from different dispersed systems and normalizing it, using microservices strategy. I think the key is to leverage that and use it for different use cases in a small scale. Something tangible. You might have a great idea, but if you don't show some kind of tangible proof of concept, nobody's going to buy in on it. So I think the key is to leverage, accelerate, and then using it in a small scale and say, hey, this could be used at other places as well. And really educating and marketing it.
Yeah. So Gene, does that sound, like one thing he was talking about, I think about both of y'all, is there's sort of a message at one level in an organization and a different message as you get down into it. Is that?
So the federal data strategy recognizes there's three complex groups.
Right.
There's government-wide, there's cross-collaboration across governments, and then there's individual agencies. And the action plan that they currently have published has probably 40 separate stages for each one of those to help people understand that data is an asset, it needs to have accountability, and it needs to be transparent. So other things that are in the plan that might matter to this organization is that today, Suzette Kent stands behind this because a year ago, she actually published that you can't get to artificial intelligence without having accountable data. And accountable data means unbiased information by which you can pull it together through data sets and be able to use it in an intelligent way. And as Health and Human Services needs it for pharmaceuticals, for fraud and detection, it's not just within their agency. They're having to reach out to industry to gather some of this information and triage it and bring it in to assess it. So I think the policy overall is just a framework to help the government establish a culture. Because really, if you look at data sets that are out there, Intel and DoD, they have to keep them like 70 years or forever. Civilian, maybe Sarbanes-Oxley, maybe. So where's the biggest repository of data? It's in finance applications, not so much everywhere else. And there's really not a policy in place by which you could collaborate. So I think this structure absolutely helps us at the right time to fit the mission, get the data right, and then move it through emerging technology for further use.
Wow. Now, is there a challenge on, because you mentioned DoD 70 years of data.
Yeah.
Is there a framework for deciding, okay, this is the data we know we're going to be using a lot, this data we can, I don't know if archive is the right word, but, store in a different way, or is that,
So a lot of the environments store metadata, so they have taggings instead of having to push all of the data. But it doesn't have a preamble to identify what that data element is. So there's a whole structure that has to be kind of organized on the usability of data. I mean, for example, FAA, all right, they have classified files. Why? Air traffic control supports the White House, the private Learjets, DoD, and all the commercial and civilian airports that are out there. They have to strip out the classified data if they want to put it in a public cloud so that industry, just like the Weather Channel, can you imagine having FAA, air traffic control for people who want to learn how to fly? I mean, that's kind of where the world's headed, right? Not just to collaborate inside, but to help industry use the data in a different way as well.
Now, Gary, are you seeing is there a cultural element to getting to this point, or?
Yeah, I think there is, and I think that's part of the federal data management strategy is to break down the silos of data, because there's in my experience, the agency-wide kind of data strategy doesn't exist really today, because everyone has their fiefdoms, probably isn't the best word, but everyone has, this is mine, and I'll show it to you if I have to. And there's no consistent data taxonomy of how that gets shared. So the metadata that you mentioned, There's no consistent metadata tag that is this FOUO, is it unclassed, can this be on the front page of the Washington Post, et cetera. That's kind of the challenge is helping them find and classify and make that data searchable and indexable so they can begin that migration. And I think since the data management strategy is still a really good draft, I think people are kind of waiting to see what is the final that comes out of that based on the feedback, but also what financial backing is going to come into this as well. Because one of the things that we saw with DCOI and until kind of money was put in MGT, a lot of people just kind of sit back and go, no, I need to keep the lights on. I can't worry about all this other stuff until I get this money to kind of back this initiative. So it'll be interesting to see that as they go forward, because I don't think we can progress into AI and machine learning without that cohesive data universe.
That's correct.
So this is sort of like that big lift.
Yeah.
That you get that done, and then you'll start to see more momentum in AI and machine learning.
Yeah, and they have a very aggressive timeline. I think it goes out to like late 20 for them to have a lot of these action items done. And it's just, they're already kind of late with the action plan. So it'll be interesting to see how far it moves to the right on top of things like FITARA, DCIM, cloud, all those elements.
Yeah. Now, when you look at the agencies, and unfortunately, we had a chief data officer, but she couldn't be here, but Teresa, but who, when you approaching an agency, and you could talk about it like at HHS, who sort of owns the data, owns this process that you're trying to reach?
Well, the government set the bill that established the value of a chief,
right?
Chief data officer, right? And most agencies don't have it, or they're tagging the CIO to also have the responsibility. Right. It's a huge responsibility.
Yeah.
So, when I saw the plan and the framework, I'm thinking, it's tough to be in the government right now. Highly respect them. Oki said cybersecurity. Well, the big part of managing this data is making sure that if it isn't meant to be public, right, if it's classified, that it never makes it outside of that enclave. But the biggest thing it's doing is changing culture. And if you do nothing else while you're on the journey to implement a policy, is to get people to recognize data is not throwawayable. It is an asset, and you have to treat it differently, and maybe you have to put it in a data set in a different way so it's usable. That is a huge change.
So, what you just said sounds so logical to me, but it sounds like, though, it's also a hard thing to convince people of?
I've been doing this. I've been in this business for 30 years. Nothing's easy, right?
Yeah.
But if they don't set a policy now to get data scientists and DevOps application developers and the Oracle databases of the world and the other object-oriented storage environments to start fitting into this business model, it'll just be a bunch of data that has no purpose. And the whole purpose behind data is to use it as an asset to improve our government services.
And being a CDO in the government is very different than being a CDO in a commercial enterprise, where they have a very defined, structured set of data that they're working with. So if they're a retail operation, it's customer 360 CRM. Now you expand to the government, where it's not just HHS, it's okay, now let me go see what I can learn from the Veterans Affairs or VHA, because all this data universe is useful, certain elements of it, and we don't always have access to all those elements of that data today.
So Oki, you all were working on this prior to this federal data strategy. What have been some of the lessons learned from Accelerate and how you're moving forward?
The biggest lessons learned is really changing culture. It's really getting people, I always say the technology is 20% of the challenge. 80% of the challenge is people, process, policies, culture. I think the biggest part was to get away. I always say this, I always coming back to this, is get away from paper. We talk about meta tagging, we talk about indexing. How are you going to index paper? How are you going to know which one to share and what not to share? You can't have a human go in there in a closet and trying to vet through, piles and piles of paper, stacks of paper. It doesn't work that way. What we did is that we used machine learning. First, we digitized the data, but then we used machine learning to bring dispersed data sets think about it, different data sets. This is just within acquisition. We can't even achieve standardization within acquisition alone. Imagine we want to share data with budget or finance or HR, because there's a need to share data, administrative data. But just acquisition alone, you cannot achieve standardization. That's out the window. That's gone. What we did was that using machine learning to take different data sets, think about Google Translate. This system speaking Russian, this system speaking Spanish, Mandarin, Italian. But when you hit this ecosystem of data lake, you interpret the information as it comes in and they all speak English. It's basically the process of normalizing the data, cleansing the data, unstructured, structured data, some data in email that's unstructured. You bring it in, clean it up. That's when you start, then you can start analyzing and do AI, do the fun stuff. But 80% of the stuff that you do in data strategy is really cleaning the data, making sense of the data. You're not going to know what to share, not to share. What's protected, what needs to be saved for 80 years or 7 years. So you have to make sense of the data, and you do that by using machine learning. And we use blockchain because there's a need to have transparency in the data. If I give data to, say, other agency, I have no insight in what they're doing with the data, right? We could write an MOU, a contract, terms and conditions. I have no insight. But when you have an ecosystem of sharing data, with blockchain, I have full transparency because it's ledger. There's a distributed ledger that's immutable, has provenance, has traceability and transparency in the data. I will know exactly what you do with my data. And that's very powerful in terms of transparency and tracing the data and making sense of the data. All this stuff is very simple, I think. It's it's not that difficult.
Yeah, no. So with for you guys, from the industry point of view, when you look at the federal data strategy, is that providing guidance to you all, like when you go to customers on like the types of questions that you should be asking or kind of information you want to get from your customer?
So I will say the CMS RFI that I saw, the use case that they put in that RFI was spectacular. They knew exactly what the problem was. They knew exactly what they needed for the outcome. They knew exactly what they needed to do with the data, and they were asking industry, who can do this for us? So the more articulate the agency can be about their mission outcomes and how they want to manipulate the data or manage the data, puts it into a different structure going in so that it comes out the way they need it to be used. I think even, for civilian agencies, saving data or putting it in a database maybe allow them to have access to some citizen information, but now to be able to, like in the retail, really mind me as a citizen and know what I can do and where I've contributed and maybe where I could contribute more, or a service that I might need for pharmaceutical needs, or where's the closest CVS and if I'm traveling. I mean, there's things that we can't even comprehend yet. And you need a framework that won't just address the data sets today, but the data sets of the future. And you need to be able to pick and choose what gets pulled in based on your governance and your decision tree to do something with that data. It's really important.
Yeah, I think that long-term view, because actually as Ozoki was talking, I remember, at one time I worked for a newsletter covering FDA, and everything was still paper-based then. And they were working on getting approval to use PDFs. And minds were blown that you could be reading this, what looked like a document, and a link that would take you to where the data was on this drug. And it was just mind-blowing to people. This was like 93, 94.
I was going to say, we're kind of aging ourselves.
Yeah. But just think how, that's just couple years. And, 20 years from now, when there's another set of people up here talking about a new data, what it'll be then. So,
yeah,
that's got to be a challenge for you guys to kind of keep with the hardware, both of y'all, with the hardware and the software to manage it.
Yeah, and I don't think it's changed the conversation that we're having with our customers per se to kind of ask them what is their data strategy. It just allows us to kind of point to a framework of something that's coming. This is coming down the road. This is something you really need to pay attention to. Because we've worked on some projects where we've taken disparate data sources, pulled them in from all these different areas and normalized them, cleansed the data, and put it in a long-term object store where it could be used by analysts and reused, renormalized or developed or manipulated and shared with various other agencies. But you're still dealing with all these legacy data feeds and data types and that are still coming in that. So we can kind of short circuit and standardize that data to where it can be shared in the context of this framework. But there's also these older systems, to Oki's point, getting rid of the paper. We need to change that digital message structure as well to modernize those data feeds where we're getting those data sets. Yeah. So,
I think what we're tracking it is always around cybersecurity and security standards, because no matter what you do, the vulnerability is always in the software, not necessarily the appliance or the hardware. So if you're going to trend to anything, you follow NIST standards. You figure out what the cybersecurity requirements are for the IC, the DoD, civilian, a little bit different, fundamentally the base, but different across the agencies. And there's a huge investment from manufacturers to be compliant and to stay compliant. But it meets the mission of what federal has to do. So that's what we have to invest into play.
Yeah. Now, Oki, when you all were starting this journey, there had to be like pockets of resistance. I mean, what was causing them to resist, and how did you kind of overcome that?
Like I said, marketability is key. People don't think about government marketing anything to be almost like a salesperson, but you have to market your idea correctly. You can't just say, hey, I have a great idea, but I'm not showing you anything. It's having that small proof of concept that you could scale out as tangible and said, hey, look, I proved this crazy idea that can work, and it will add value. And the return on investment, that's why I always go back to the strong business plan. Having a strong business plan and engaging the workforce is key. And to be honest with you, if you want to move to the cloud or sunset old technology, look at the data. Start data mapping, and you could get rid of the duplicative systems or systems that are doing the same function if you follow the trail of data. Because most of the systems are doing the same thing. But if you start looking data mapping it, and you could actually not only sunset the technology, but you could condense the process as well, like the TurboTax. Think about it. You could condense the process drastically. That's a big return on investment.
So for you all, I mean, you've mentioned the CMS, and that seems like a gold standard. What are you seeing from agencies that aren't at that level, and how are you getting them? Is there a way to get them up, or is there a way to approach them when you don't see that great RFI?
So the IC community's had analysts forever. The civilian agencies are just really understanding data scientists for the first time. Data scientists attached to mission and why the agency exists to serve the citizen or the warfighter is exactly what the data scientists will create in order to create these data sets for the future. So it really isn't just a cultural change for the agencies to keep the data. It's to create these data scientists that truly understand the mission of these agencies and develop the applications of the data sets that'll live for the mission.
Yeah, I think that's a key point, but I think also it's dealing with kind of their day-to-day challenges to prepare them for that next step, and things like as a service or consumption models, flexible cloud deployment models, management of that, puts them in a position where they can begin to look at that data and find all that data and choose what needs to go in the cloud, what type of formatting does it need, et cetera. That's a lot of the challenges that we're dealing with today, because the typical CapEx procurement, people realize that those days are long gone, and this is another method for them to move to that shining city on the hill that CMS is kind of leading the forefront, it sounds like, in that case.
That's this idea of the mission, I hadn't thought about that really in terms of the data, but that's a really strong selling point. I mean, it's a big change. Yeah. Wow. Is that sort of part of how you marketed it to folks? We
didn't really talk much about technology when we market it. Who cares about the technology, right? You market, is it aligned with the legislations, the PMA, the MGT, Data Act? People still using spreadsheets to compare data from finance acquisition to FPDS, USA spending. We're going to make your life easier. They could care less about the technology. It's aligned with the legislation. It's aligned with the policies. It's going to make your life easier. That's how you sell it.
Yeah. Now I know that Teresa's not here, but the chief data officer, what role do you guys hope that grows into at agencies?
From my perspective, I hope it turns into kind of the chief arbiter of that data taxonomy and is a network of data officers across the government where we can have consistency and a single, or as close as you can get to single, data standard, whether it's civilian versus DoD versus IC. Maybe they have 3 different standards, but interchangeable and interoperable data standards so we can have sharing of data where it's appropriate across that. You know, I think the goal with the CIO was to kind of mirror what we see in commercial enterprise where the CIO is directing IT strategy and has influence in that. I hope the CDOs have influence in the decisions that are being made around the data, because I know with the CIOs, because they didn't have the money to kind of force changes in the environment, they're kind of hamstrung, and it's slowed that a little bit where it's still down at the mission or the program. Hopefully the CDO is elevated to the point where they can impact some of those decisions being made around the data.
The CDO will absolutely establish why the data is an asset. And then they'll set the policy based on the guidelines on how it's going to be used inside of the agency and collaborated across other agencies. It's a big role.
Yeah.
But somebody needs to do it because it's never been really focused on before.
Yeah, and I guess if it's like we said earlier, it's that lift to get to how you exploit AI and machine learning, things like that. What's the CDO? Can you describe the CDO role at HHS?
That's a tough question. I think you just got to understand the data and the mission of the agency, understand not just administrative data, but also the program data, and making sense of it and saying, like, what is the strategy moving forward? Got to work closely with the CIO. There's some IT component into it as well. So I think that's the key, to really understand the data and understand IT as well.
Yeah.
Because
Okay. So I want to just take a pause and see if there's any questions from the audience at this stage. Yes, ma'am. Just the microphone's coming right there.
So you talked about the culture change a lot. So it's interesting how industry can actually help the agencies to drive that change in the mindset of the government people. What can we do for that?
actually, the people that lead our human-centered design for efforts is all vendors, industry people that we contracted out to. Is really engaging the workforce and trying to understand their pain points and really have a good relationship with them. Really, that's the key. Just to meet with them regularly, trying to understand their pain points. What do they want out of this? Because we have the requirements. We have the federal acquisition requirement. That's by law. But really, just because people tend to do things they've been doing for years and years. Maybe it's not requirements, maybe it's something that they adopted along the way, but you still have to listen to them, and in some cases you have to add that into the process, just to change culture. It's meeting people in the middle, basically.
And that was a industry coming in, vendors coming in to talk to you all?
No, we contracted out the human-centered design.
Oh, okay.
We can't just say, do it my way and get out of the way. That will never work.
Yeah.
It's just meeting them in the middle.
Okay.
The federal data strategy has an advisory board under Suzette Kent, and while they have the first version of the plan out, they are asking for best practices from industry and/or anybody in the government to review it and help them see what they can't see. So if you want to have a voice, you have to use it, or it'll stay hidden.
Is that an area where leveraging things like OTAs to do POCs or new developments is a great way to approach the agencies to kind of proof of concept these ideas around data strategy?
Yes, I think OMB is pushing for something scalable. something incremental, something small, do a proof of concept, and come back and we'll give you money the next year. It's incremental. You can't just say, oh, I want to modernize, I need 20 million. It takes 5 years, leadership, change and workforce change, and in some cases it's not relevant anymore because technology moves so fast, things are changing so fast. If you don't evolve, you become obsolete. So that's why incremental proof of concept, something small, and then scale out.
Okay. So we had a question here in the middle.
Yeah, so my question was, I was reading about just basically data scientists recently, and I was looking at Target. And Target looks at trends within their internal company, but also outside. And they were able to actually pick up so much information on people, they would be able to send them information about being pregnant before the person even knew they were pregnant, just by looking at what's happening. When it comes to your data and the information looking at, are you looking to kind of pull those same trends out and use that same type of, there's no true AI yet, but machine learning to grab that information and look at and be able to anticipate before something actually happens moving forward within your own agencies?
Yeah, so
or companies.
Could I go first?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Because I want to automate the CDM program. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the CDM program. It's Continuous Diagnostic Mitigation by Homeland Security. Half of that is automating the ATO. The other half is analyzing, reporting incidents or threat patterns. We did a proof of concept to put the logs into the blockchain. Think about it, and I'm going to start with the business. When WannaCry happened, it take the Homeland Security said, "Hey, WannaCry happened. Scan your environment. Have you been affected?" Takes a week, 2 weeks to scan the environment, but also you have to start doing data call because you want to penetrate down to the OS level, the database, the application, hardware logs, anything that would have a trace of WannaCry. But if it takes 2 weeks to do that, that's not acceptable, right? But what if you feed the logs into an ecosystem and you have this ecosystem of logs? Then you could start analyzing, running AI to do threat hunting, threat reconnaissance, and start analyzing behaviors, not just system, but users' behavior, using recurring neural network to analyze and almost profiling the patterns or the threats, almost like FBI profiling, criminals. And you could become proactive in terms of, you could whitelist out the normal behaviors, but start looking at anomalies and start targeting those anomalies. And why blockchain? The NIST standard said, hey, you need retention. You need to keep the logs in a certain period of time, right? 6 months, a year, whatever. It depends on the requirements. We spoke to forensic investigators and we talked to incident response team. Most of the time, they can't find all the logs, or they're not complete logs because either they ran out of space and they overwrite it, or they move it to a backup site, they can't find it, and then you start treating that as a malicious activity, but the log's not there. But what if the logs are in this ecosystem? The CISO, the CIO, the forensic investigator, the OIG, IRT, don't really have visibility into the data, but they know the data's there, because they have transparency through blockchain and said, okay, that's there. It meets the requirements. So when a threat advisory comes from Homeland Security, I could scan it. In a matter of seconds, I could tell Homeland Security, hey, we're good on whatever threat is. You don't need to wait 2 weeks. I don't need to do a data call. Somebody might be on vacation, people not responding fast enough. In a matter of seconds, I could scan the environment, say, hey, I'm good. And then the ATO process, what is the longest part in the ATO process? It's the testing. Waiting to be tested, testing. A lot of paper pushing around. If you look at the ATO package, it's about 500 pages long, over 500 controls. If we digitize that and run AI through criteria, which is the NIST to provide you the criteria, you could do that in a matter of an hour. That's why I could condense a 6 months, 9 month process into 2 weeks or less. The ATO and then the logs would really managing risk in real time. You don't have to wait 3 years, when you're waiting, the security posture went down, we have to shut down that system. No, in a matter of seconds, I could shut down the system because I know the security posture in real time Has it gone up or gone down? Things change so much. Things are affecting systems so much. We are doing DevOps, we're doing Agile. Things are constantly changing. You can't be waiting 3 years or a year to decide if the system should be shut down or not. And that's the true automation of risk management. And I think I could do it. I think I could do it within 6 months.
Wow. You guys, anything to add on as far as?
So the target to the person, I don't think is really where the government's going unless they want to improve a service. But Homeland Security, for example, they're spending through SBIRs awards that are under $250,000 a pop. It goes back to what Oki talked about for blockchain. And the reason why they're using blockchain is because they're trying to do discovery of chemical airborne agents and try to triage all that. So if there's a chemical spill, there's a plume moving northeast by northwest, they can actually do some kind of broadcast to abandon a city or a city block. They're also doing research for items that should not be crossing our borders and coming into this country. So I think what you'll see the intelligence will be on making this a safer and a better place, but not necessarily trying to maybe intrude a little bit on my personal identity information. Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay. So, okay, just to kind of follow up a little bit on what you were just talking about. So you're with CDM, you're thinking like proactively capturing these logs. You would load them into an environment that then would be monitoring it and looking for the patterns, whitelisting patterns, and then.
Correct. And the logs cannot, you could, if you're a sysadmin, I don't know if some of you guys are sysadmin, you could alter the logs if you wanted to. Instead of having one person with the key to the kingdom, you could have the CISO's eyes on it, the forensic investigator, whoever needs to have an eye on that ecosystem. It brought in the trust, because trust has a lot of risk, right? You trust somebody, the sysadmin, to do something right, but you can't verify if they're doing something right. With blockchain, you could trust and verify. And that's very powerful. And you know that the log's there now because you have blockchain. You know the log's there. I could scan it anytime I want. There's this black box that I have the CISO's not going to have transparency into what's going on. Imagine the cloud, right? Trying to get logs out of the cloud, good luck with that. I mean, if it's not in the contract, if you got to look at the contract correctly, it's going to be tough. You got to do data call. But what if you say, we're gonna take the log in our contract, you have to send us a log, it's going straight to the blockchain, it's immutable, then that's very powerful. I think that's the key, that's the holy grail of cybersecurity is blockchain and AI.
Now, Gary and Jean, what do you all see as the best role for industry to play in pushing the strategy forward and helping these agencies with their data challenges?
I think from our perspective is bringing technology, whether it's hardware and software, and the services to help them define that data strategy and really kind of move it forward. Because a lot of customers I go to, they don't know, like I said before, they don't know where their data is, how old it is, what state it's in, how useful it is. And just help them kind of start that journey. I think that's kind of the industry's best part, and Oki kind of mentioned that, doing that proof of concept and showing them kind of the art of the possible in a small scale and then expanding it out. So,
our companies have something in common. It's still called storage. It leads with software defined, and it still has a platform and a need for this strategy and for helping the government use the data the way they need to. I think we're going to be around for quite a while.
Yeah.
We have staying power.
Yeah.
And demands like this absolutely allows us to listen to the voice of the customer and continue to build and innovate around what they need.
Yeah. And Oki, what do you want from industry?
Help us get away from paper. But really the key, I mean, it's kind of scary, right? When you have so many cloud environment, people just go into the cloud left and right with little governance. I think the future is to bring back the data inside the environment on-prem, but have the functionality of, you could use whatever you want. But we need transparency, control of the data, but you could have functionality, decentralize the functionality, but standardize the data and centralize the data. That makes sense. You could use whatever software you want, but standardize the data so we have full control of data. That would improve cybersecurity and have transparency in the data. But right now, data is all over the place. I mean, it's out in AWS, Azure, Microsoft Cloud, Google Cloud, all kinds of hosting environment. That's scary from a cybersecurity perspective.
Yeah. Any other questions, or we'll ready to go to happy hour? All right. Well, thank you, panel. Thank you all.